Hello and welcome to Cisco part 3 of our course. Part 3 already, right? Amazing. So, what's in today's lesson? Today's lesson I'm going to be talking about resetting passwords. We're going to be talking about the config registries, right? And how they relate to the system. We are going to go a little bit about the boot up sequence in a Cisco router, Cisco device. And I'm going to show you kind of how that works in real life. I think we'll end the lesson there because it's quite a lot of information to take in. I'm going to show you also how you need to set up your system, your PC, to access the switch / router and what that looks like in real life. Right. So let's dig in. Right. First thing you want for this lab is you want to have a laptop like I have here. This is my Acer. You will also need a USB to RS-232 cable, which is this right here. And you'll also need a console cable, which is the black cable down here, right? On your computer, what you want to do is you want to download a software called, and this is one of my personal favorites, Teraterm, right? Teraterm. And now, if you're wondering kind of what RS-232 USB thing I have here, this is called a pluggable. And the reason why I chose this one was because it has an inbuilt driver for Windows, which can be detected. And that means that you can have more control over the timings and things of that nature. Now, if we exit out of Teraterm and we go to Teraterm, okay. Sorry, I can't show that. That had some personal information. If we go here, and you go to serial, and now you'll be able to connect to COM4, which is down here. And then you click on OK. Okay. Now, even though we don't have the system booted up, in other words, our Cisco 2901, I don't know where I got 2909 from, 2901 is not active at the moment, what we'll get is we'll get the boot up sequence coming from the serial into our environment here, in other words, Teraterm, right? When the iOS comes online, right? Now, inside of a router, you have different compartments of memory. You have the RAM, which is the random access memory, and that's the same as what you have in your computer, right? Random access memory just means that it's only the memory, the contents of the memory is only available when the computer is online, right? In other words, it's powered on. As soon as you restart, as soon as you experience a power cut and you want to put it back on again, all of the contents of the memory is erased. That's where non-volatile RAM comes in, right? Non-volatile RAM, or NVRAM, right, inside of a system. So for example, a computer, right, essentially means the contents of the memory persists over time, even in the event of a reboot, right? So in Cisco, on a router, right, we go back to our router, you will see that there's a couple of things that are notable here, right? So on the back, you don't see anything, right? You see a couple of lights like system activity, then you have power over Ethernet, which is PoE, okay? So system activity, power over Ethernet. So this indicates the loading of the system, in other words, what the system is loading. And when the system is loading, the system will load the startup configuration, because that's in the non-volatile memory. The configuration which is in the volatile memory is called the startup configuration. So, sorry, the running configuration is called the running configuration. The one in non-volatile is called the startup configuration. So, sorry, right, let me get this right. The one that's in the RAM is called the running configuration. The one in the NVRAM is called the startup configuration. How do I know this? Because the command is called copy run start. So the running config has to be in the RAM, has to be in the RAM. The startup config is in the NVRAM. The NVRAM. Okay? That's how I know that. Okay. So, that's that. So that's the power on off button right inside your system. Now, sometimes you may need to wonder where exactly these kettle leads go to, right? Quick tip, you want to just like that, right? Follow that movement down through or throughout the system, and then you just turn it on, right? I'm not going to waste time doing all that because you get the idea. Right, moving on to the front. In terms of password reset, there's a couple of things that you want to know inside of some Cisco systems, particularly on older ones, right? Like my 2109. Now, I don't mind showing you this because this is a lab environment and this is not connected onto my main network in any way. So I don't really mind showing you these passwords because they're not connected to the internet in any way. You're not going to be able to get into them. So who cares, right? Now, in the real world, yeah, password security is a thing. Use something like HashiCorp Vault or GitHub Secrets Management or Cloudflare in order to manage your secrets. If you have access to, high levels of switching, for example, my Arista, obfuscate it using the SDKs, so that way you don't reveal the password in plain text, right? Security is not guaranteed, okay? Anything can be hacked, anything can be cracked, but follow best practice of least privilege, and you'll get pretty far, okay? So, this is the console cable, which has been connected, and you can use USB, or you can use the, well, this is an RJ, it's not really RJ45, but it's RJ45 compatible. And this is the bit which kind of goes in, right? I believe this is called a rollover cable, if I remember correctly, but again, not having been done for a long time, you don't really need to know exactly what it is, but just know that the cable goes into this particular port, essentially, okay? That's all we need to know. Now, this is where the compact flash lives, right? When we do a password reset, we are told on certain older devices like the 2901 to take out the compact flash and reinsert it in certain intervals. Now, on my particular device, I have the password set in the NVRAM of the system, which is inside of here, so you can't see it, which is why these two ports are not occupied. Now, in older devices, you could, take them out, put them into the compact flash, so you have the run config and the start config on the compact flash, and the system will load iOS kind of from compact flash, because in these older systems, the amount of memory that you have is small, and so in this device, I think it's 512. This was an upgraded version, but 512 megabytes of RAM, is really pathetic nowadays. You can't really do anything with 512 megs of anything. So, yeah, it's all loaded from inside of the system. So there's a little flash chip. This flash chip contains the iOS running config and the startup config in the system, right? So that's all cool, right? Yeah, I think we've dabbled on the system for long enough. Let's turn it on. Here we go. And what you'll see now is, as I'm turning it on, the system activity light is on orange, which is good. And we have an activity light which is on green, which is also good. Now, moving on to our teraterm. So I'm on COM4, right? And it will tell you in teraterm which COM is active, right? Now, what we need to do is we need to wait for the system to kind of send us information, which it has done. And at this point, we need to send a break, right, at the romon, the read-only romon initialized. So at this point here, and what happens then is that will go into romon 1, okay? Now inside of romon 1, right, when we do our show versions, we're gonna be left with two options, okay? And why do I say two options? Because if I bring myself over to the Cisco documentation, it will say that there's two configuration registers that we need to be aware of, okay? The first configuration register is 2102, I believe, is the configuration register. I'm just going to double check to make sure I have that bit of information at hand. There we go, 2102, 0x2102. And this is essentially setting this is what the router should be set onto. And this is the register, the memory register, whereby the system is not on the default state. But in other words, it's loading from the startup configuration, essentially. The startup configuration in the memory itself. Okay? Because we're referencing states of memory. Right? Now, when we do configuration register 0x2142, what we're saying is we want to revert back to the default state of the running configuration. So in other words, what happens is we get the blank running configuration, which we can then utilize to reset the router, essentially. Okay? Okay, cool. So when we reset passwords, what we want to do is we want to go to romon, and then we want to use the configuration register of 0x2142 in romon 1. Let's copy that. And we're going to go down here. And now we're in romon 2. Okay, which is fine. And what you want to do is we want to reset the system. So because of some mistakes, it's going into romon 4, but don't worry about that. And we're going to type reset. Okay. Now reset is the same in romon 1 as it is for romon anything, romon X. So I wouldn't worry about it saying romon 4, because what we can do is reset, and this will reboot the router, so that way we can now go into the mode which allows us to then use the blank running configuration, okay? Which means we can then reset the password. So it's going to take a bit of time to do that. It takes about a good 2-3 minutes. And then as you can see, when I'm in romon initialized. Okay. And if you want to reset the password now, what we need to do is utilize 2 commands. There's one called the user command, which is like the user execution mode, essentially. Because there's 2 modes in Cisco. Okay. And I'll show you those 2 modes in a second. And there's one called privileged execution mode, which is where you do the enable secret stuff. Okay, we're jumping ahead a little bit, but I want to show you what that looks like. So I'm going to let this load. Okay, and I'll tell you a little bit about the user mode, and I'll talk a little bit about the execution mode, and then the privileged execution mode. Okay, so user mode is where you have the least amount of commands, where you can't really do anything, right? So this is kind of like where you do more of your very basic mundane stuff. You can't really do anything when it's in user mode. You want to go down to the privilege mode. And inside the privilege mode, you do things like EN, for example. That's when you get into the EN and you get a little sharp. Okay. Now in there, you do your show commands. This is where you do like your TFTP, for example, that sort of stuff. Okay. Now in privileged exec mode, which is the conf T, when you do the configuration terminal, that's when you start configuring the router / switch. Okay, cool. So now we're loading straight back in, and what you'll see is we will have like this symbol here, right? The more than symbol. So this should take us only a few more minutes, but we should be able to get in because this is a bit of an older switch / router. Let's go with router. There's an older router, and the reason why is because I got this kind of 15-20 years ago, and we don't really use this anymore, so this is why it's kind of slow. Now on a new kind of on a new router, you have this dialog box. This is what you see in the Cisco kind of stuff, the packet tracer, and you get the initial configuration. What we want to do is type no, because we don't need it. We know a lot of commands, so we're not going to be doing any of that. And what we'll see now is that we'll say router down here, right? And a lot of the interfaces are down. We're not too interested in that. But now we're in the user mode. Okay. So when we're in user mode, which is this sharp stuff, right, we don't see things like show, for example. We're not in privileged mode. So to reiterate, this is user mode, okay, where we have router and this symbol here. If we can focus. Focus. I think you can, I'm not sure if you can see that, but there we go. So you see you have router down here. Then you have this symbol here. That's called user mode. Okay. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to type in conft, which means configuration terminal. Oh, sorry, we need to do en first. Okay. Now en, this is where we do our show commands. Okay. So our show commands. And we have other things like IP, for example. We have VLAN. So this is kind of where we get the basic show information as to what's going on in the system. Okay, this is what we generally use the sharp for. Okay, now if we go into the next mode, it will be conft. Now conft is our privileged execution mode. Right. So if I look for configuration terminal or configure. Right, what this one does, enters configuration mode, right? So we're going to enter the configuration mode via configuration terminal. Okay, and you'll see config down here, and this is our privileged execution mode. Okay, now in here, this is where we do a lot of the configuration for any Cisco equipment. Okay, this goes for things like setting the host name, setting the VLANs, setting things like routing, like BGP. That kind of stuff is all handled at this mode. So you can see how many commands we have here, like VTP. You know, VTP is no longer used, but you know, so many different commands here, right? MAC address table, login, L2TP, right? All of this stuff is done in this mode, right? CDP, for example. Okay. So how do we set a password now, right? Because we're trying to reset our password. Now this mode, if we look back at the documentation, what we need to do now is do a enable secret, and we can do like the user admin, for example. Those are a couple of things. So if we go down here to our terminal, we'll do a user admin, okay, and if we do a that should be fine, user admin. And then password Cisco. Should be able to configure that here. Ambiguous command. Can we do user? No. Yeah, let's go one level up. Thank you. User command. Unrecognized. Okay, in that case then what we'll do is we'll utilize the enable secret command, and we will reset the password that way. And the enable secret is stronger than the password command because the password command usually writes password in plain text, but enable secret does encryption at the MD5 level. So enable secret, and we'll call it Cisco. And I do believe we need to be in configuration to do that. And we'll do enable secret Cisco. Okay, cool. So we've set that password. And what we can do now is we can do something called show versions to see where we are with our configuration. And I do believe this should error out. Yeah, there we go. So in the exam, you won't be able to do this, but you can do a do. And it will show you a little bit about where you are in terms of the registry. And it should say somewhere around here. Should be like 21. There we go, 2142. Configuration register set to 2142. And I just want to check to see whether or not that's what we should be in. And it's not. We